All right, let me paint a picture for you really quick. So let's just picture that you finished a training session with a client. They happen to hit a new PR. They're fired up. They're thanking you. They're telling you that you're the best trainer you ever had. You've probably all heard these things before. And what is actually going through your head? You're going to figure out, I don't actually know what I'm doing, is typically what you're kind of thinking. Like they have no idea what's going on. Does it sound familiar? And if you've ever felt like you're either one Google search or chat GPT search away from being exposed, or that every other kind of trainer and strength coach out there has it figured out except you, this episode's probably going to hit home for you. And because what you're expecting has a name, and it's called imposter syndrome, and it's far more common in the fitness industry than anyone really ever kind of talks about. Welcome back to the Third More Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Smitley, and today I'm going to talk more about the psychology behind imposter syndrome, why fitness professionals are especially vulnerable to it, and more importantly, what the actual research and science is saying about how you can manage it so it can help limiting your career and your potential, especially from a revenue side. If you happen to be like an independent personal trainer, or you even happen to be, like a business owner, or even working online with clients, I think this definitely applies there. I'm not going to give like a motivational pep talk kind of thing. I'm going to use some evidence, some research, and some psychology. And hopefully by the end of the episode, you're going to understand exactly what's happening in your brain, but also have a concrete idea and framework of how you can actually go about this, improve that, and overall see that transpire into your clients, your coaching, your services. And, ultimately, I hope it really helps you not only make more money. I don't want to make this just about money, but also helps you create better relationships and overall just have a better understanding of what's going on between you, your client, the gym that you're working with, and all of that combined to just overall elevate your career. So the first thing I want to talk about before we can even really fix this as a problem, I do think that we need to define it properly. And I think that's where a lot of the fitness industry content on this topic in particular in regards to imposter syndrome really kind of falls short, misses the boat. That's just my opinion. But people throw around the term imposter syndrome like it's just low self-confidence, that you're lacking confidence and conviction in what you're doing. And I will tell you that firsthand, generally speaking, this can sometimes be a good thing, especially early on in your career, because I think that's showing humility. And many trainers, and as people that walk into our industry, generally don't have that. They think they're much better than they actually are. And it's not just low self-confidence. It can be, but generally speaking, I don't believe that it is. And it's generally a specific psychological pattern, and understanding this distinction can really help us determine how we can go after it. If you do happen to suffer from this or have suffered from this, you probably will be able to relate to it. So going back and doing a little bit of research, imposter syndrome was first identified in 1978 by clinical psychologist Dr. Pauline Rose Clarence and Dr. Suzanne Imes. And their original paper, published in Psychotherapy, Theory, Research, and Practice, described what they called the imposter phenomenon, a persistent internal experience of intellectual phoniness in individuals who, by all objective external measures, are actually highly successful. And here is the critical part of this isn't about people who are actually unqualified, pretending to be qualified. That's just overall fraudulent, and that is also very, very rampant in the fitness industry. Imposter syndrome specifically targets people who are competent in their field. I mean, not just fitness, but any field in general, but we're talking about the fitness industry here. But the people who are competent and cannot internalize their competence within themselves. And there's a disconnect between objective achievement and the internal self-assessment that's going on. And the research on this prevalence is pretty staggering. That a 2020 systematic review that I found, published in the Journal of Internal Medicine by Bravada and colleagues, analyzed 62 studies, and they found that imposter syndrome prevalence rates range from 9% to 82%, which is, again, pretty big range, depending upon the screening tools used and obviously the population that was studied. Their best estimate was that roughly 70% of all people will experience at least one episode of imposter syndrome feelings during their lifetime and in their careers, especially, if you're happen to be very successful. And so 70% is a pretty big range. So if you are feeling this or have gone through this, you are definitely in the majority of this. This is not something that's like uncommon. Again, personally, I have felt this as well. There are times that I do initially get like a little bit brief of this, but then I have to remember that I'm confident in what I know, and if I practice what I know, everything is going to be all right. But as I begin to try to learn new things and elevate not only my coaching game but my business game, my interpersonal game, that you're always going to have a little bit of this, even though for example, I've been in this for a long period of time at this point, that I've probably experienced something very similar in the past, and I have to reference that and understand that from a strength and conditioning and performance and personal training side, like I do know my stuff, so I need to rely on that and then use that as my background to be able to stand firmly where I'm at, but also be able to have discussions with people. And I think other people can draw on this. You may not have as much experience as me. You may have more experience than me and still go through this. But you want to rely on those experiences. So again, I just want to make sure that if you do feel imposter syndrome or you have, then you're definitely not alone. And you're definitely, again, not in the minority. You're actually in the majority of feel this. And so there are technically 5 different imposter types. And Dr. Valerie Young, who built on the Clance and IAM's original work, we talked about that, just discussed what this imposter syndrome was, that they basically broke down and discovered that there's 5 distinct subtypes of this imposter syndrome in the research. And I think as fitness professionals, we will recognize themselves at least in one of these. Like you should be able to be like, yep, this is definitely me. So let's kind of go through those. So the first one is going to be the perfectionist. So it'd be somebody that is going to set extremely high standards for themselves. When you hit like 95% of them, you fixate on just the 5% that you might be missing or you're not understanding. So a program worked great for a client, but wasn't perfect. You might beat yourself up. You delivered a solid continuing education presentation, but stumbled on one question. That's all that you're going to remember, right? You're focusing on the minutia or majoring in the minor of the very small things that honestly, most people probably didn't even notice. And you killed it on the rest of it. So definitely something that I feel like that I can relate to as I'm here on a podcast. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to mispronounce something, right? I'm not going to follow my outline exactly. I may bounce around and tweak some things, as I'm kind of discussing things, because again, I do just shoot this off the top of my head outside of the outlines that I create. So it's designed to be able to create discussion, right? So I know it's not going to be perfect, but ideally I still want it to be a good episode and something that you can take something away from. Okay. So that's a good practical example. The next is going to be the expert. So you feel like you need to know everything before you're qualified to speak on a topic or train a particular population. So you've gone and gotten like your CSCS or your CBT, maybe a nutrition certification, maybe even a corrective exercise thing, or done like a different educational based aspect of biomechanics, and you still don't feel like you know enough. So you hoard certifications like they're going to be the thing that finally makes you feel legitimate and that you're understanding, and you happen to go after all these. And there are people that just load up on the certifications, and I think they have their place, right? I do think that at a bare minimum, if you're going to work in this field, you should at least get your CPT or your CSCS or USAW, right? Something along those lines to, one, cover you from a liability standpoint, two, give you actually a little bit of credibility. And especially we hate certifications sometimes because they don't actually truly prove what you know, right? It's kind of like that intro step, just to be able to prove that you know some stuff, that you can pass the exam, you have a basic understanding and knowledge of the anatomy, the physiology, the programming, right? It's just the basics. But there are some people that go down the rabbit hole, getting a bunch of them, and they just put a bunch of letters after their names, and they think that makes them look more qualified, and that makes them look like the expert. Where, as we know, strength and conditioning, personal training, working in the actual fitness industry, it is a blend of art and science. There is a nice relationship between those two things, and the best coaches know how to blend those together. So you don't have to actually know everything, and if you do feel like you know everything, that's a big problem. I think it's great to be well-versed on a number of things and have a couple of things that you happen to feel a little bit more expertise on, that you're more passionate about and that you really want to kind of go after. but I think it's also great to have a generalization as well. There's number three is going to be the natural genius. So this is somebody that's going to judge their competence based on ease and speed. So if you happen to work hard to understand a topic like periodization, programming, or biomechanics, you think that means you're not actually smart enough to be doing this. And, it's not always going to come easy to you. And especially when I think about like the biomechanics side, I think about the compression expansion model, particularly in regards to Bill Hartman. Like he can just rattle this stuff off. Like he is the expert. And it's great to try to learn stuff from him. And I follow other people that have also learned stuff from him. I try to find it dialed down. And I still get confused on concepts and whatever. And I have to go back and double check myself and essentially ensure that what I'm thinking is correct. Right. And so just because something doesn't naturally come to you doesn't mean that you're not worthy and understanding of it. You may have to put in a little more time, but that's everybody. If you think back to your days of grade school, right, you had subjects that you usually liked and you caught on to very easily. And there were subjects that you had to work much harder on. You had to be more diligent on your studying for the exams or making sure that you do the homework or had to outsource, maybe even tutoring, right? That's all very common for every single person. But some people tend to lump into this natural genius where they just think they naturally get stuff, especially in the fitness industry. This just come firsthand, and it's not going to. All right, the fourth type is going to be the soloist. So you feel like you have to achieve everything on your own. So asking a colleague for help with programming, for example, around a client's injury feels like proof that you're not good enough to be able to do this. And reaching out to a mentor feels like weakness. I first want to say that that's not true. That's one reason why you should have a mentor, especially in this field, somebody that you can look up to, somebody you can bounce ideas off of. And those conversations are great because they should be a two-way street and they really genuinely probably help both people, right? Now, this industry in particular, because there's so many specific aspects of fitness, right? Fitness is just a global thing, but you can go down so many different individual rabbit holes. And that's why so many people really create a name for themselves as they go down this niche area that they really do understand. They don't have to do everything by themselves, though. It's okay if you happen to be more of the conditioning guy. That's fantastic. And you're not great with mobility. Just trying to figure it out on your own isn't necessarily always the greatest idea. Outsource or reach out to someone that is really good at mobility programming and understanding that and pick their brain so that you can get some stuff away from it. So these are people that just want to always do things on themselves. And I'll be the first to admit that many times, I have no problem reaching out to people for help, but I do like to I don't want to say necessarily in charge and do it all myself. But there are many times that I would much rather just try to do things myself initially and see if I can figure it out. And sometimes, especially from a business standpoint, it's just better to reach out to somebody because it's going to save you time, energy, and effort. And it could get you to the exact same roadmap and into the roadmap at the much faster pace and make you better at the same time. So that's number 4. And number 5 is then going to be the superhuman. It's going to be that person that pushes themselves to work harder than everybody else around themselves, but not because you love the actual hustle aspect of it, but because you're convinced that if you slow down or stop, everyone will see that you're not as good as you think, that you're the trainer who's first in, last out, not out of passion, but out of fear. And this is, I think there's a time and place for this for everybody. I think there's a time where you do have to hustle. You do have to be that first guy in. You do have to be that first person to leave or the last person to leave. I think there's a time and place for that for sure, but that's not something that you have to do all the time. And this one I can really, really relate with from a business perspective because I always, almost in my head, I feel like if I'm not doing something for my business, trying to be a better coach, trying to run things, trying to optimize things, trying to cut down on some expenses here and there, those are all things that constantly run through my head. And I do feel like I've made improvement over the past 7.5 years, but I do feel like there's also room to grow. And, I don't think I'm a superhuman, but there are times where I just genuinely feel like there's more I can be doing when really I'm probably not. Like I'm probably not going to get marginally better at something or get something accomplished. It can wait until Monday. Spending time with my family, friends might be something that's actually more important. And this is very, very common in the fitness industry because it does reward hustling early on, especially early on. you usually do have to hustle. But once you've kind of got a solid client base, the hustling can really kind of slow down. And here's what I want you to sit with and kind of marinate with for a second is that none of these types are about lacking the actual skill. They're all about the story that you're telling yourself about your skill. And that distinction is incredibly important. Okay. It's not that, again, that you aren't capable and having it. It's about what's going on upstairs that makes you think that you don't have what it is. And that brings me to this next segment of why are fitness professionals especially vulnerable? And so now that we understand the psychology side of this, here's where it gets specific to us as fitness professionals, strength coaches, personal trainers, maybe even nutritionists, whoever happens to be listening to this from a fitness perspective. Because I'd argue that the fitness industry has a unique, like, cocktail of conditions, I guess is probably the best way for me to put it, that make imposter syndrome not just common, but almost inevitable. And I'm going to walk you through the big ones that I've kind of noticed. And factor number one is going to be the low barrier to entry and the high judgment. And we got to be very, very clear about the fitness industry is that you can become a quote unquote, I'm going to say it's quote, but we're going to say you can become a certified personal trainer, but really you can just become a personal trainer, period. Not even certified, just a weekend with some certifications, or, buying the material and studying hard for it really quickly and just doing it over a couple of weeks. And I'm not saying that to disrespect anyone individually or just our field in general. I'm just saying it because it creates a real psychological tension, and it's just the truth of the matter of our industry. So an entry into a profession doesn't require years of formal education. It's easy for us to internalize this message that what we do isn't that serious or that complex, right? I mean, for me personally, as somebody that has a master's degree and has spent over 6 years of just formal education on top of getting 3 different certifications and over 2,000 hours of interning, watching somebody that has never trained somebody before call themselves a personal trainer and start doing boot camps and random things, and they have no idea what the hell is really truly going on with the body and how to program things. They're just taking stuff off social media, which is incredibly common. That does frustrate me as a professional, right? I know that most of those people generally don't make it, but the fact of the matter is those are the people that are incredibly ambitious early on, and they get a big following or a big push initially. And for somebody like me, like I don't like seeing that, right? That's where the imposter syndrome of me comes out. I'm like, I don't like this. Like, how am I investing, 15, 16, almost 17 years at this point of my life into this profession, and someone's going to go trust this random Joe or Jane versus what I'm able to do within my skill set and my business, right? It's real. It happens. So I just want you to let you know that's how I feel about it. And we really think about it deep down, we're actually dealing with human bodies and actual human individuals, right? Potential injury risks, chronic diseases, mental health issues, the nutrition side of people not eating well and trying to help them improve their health through nutrition as well. These are incredibly complex domains when you really break it down. So we've got this gap between how society sometimes views our profession and the actual complexity of what we actually do. And that gap breeds the imposter feelings that I've kind of displayed here. And doing some research, I found that a 2019 study in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health by Neuter and Matinash, I hope I said that correctly. It looks like it's German, found that imposter syndrome was significantly correlated with other perceived professional legitimacy. Perceived professional legitimacy. So when people feel their profession isn't taken seriously by others, their internal sense of fraudulence naturally increases. And rightfully so, right? Like, let's just take, for example, like a bartender, right? Are there amazing bartenders out there that do a kick-ass job and like make a ton of money and are big metros? Like, they're actually really well known because they do a really freaking good job, and they've put in this time and this effort, and they've went to learn how to do these things, and they've built up the experience to be a good bartender. When at the end of the day, really anybody can just go apply to be a bartender. And when you think about a bartender, you don't think about that really exceptional one. You think about your average bartender, right? I'm going to go get me a Jack and Coke. How difficult is that? Right. But there are professionals there. And so that's a great example is that, you know, that profession isn't necessarily taken seriously by very many people. And that's going to create a natural sense of fraudulence if you happen to be that exceptional bartender. And the personal training realm is for sure one of those. All right, factor number 2 on this is the social media comparison culture. And this one is massive, especially now in 2026 when this is being recorded. If you haven't been listening at a later date, I apologize, but it's probably not changed that much. That when you scroll Instagram or TikTok and you see other trainers with a 6-pack abs or 500,000 followers, clients who happen to look like fitness models, and content that makes everything look absolutely effortless, like it's super like professionally edited, or they happen to have all that stuff down. What we don't see is their editing processes, their team, their personal struggles, or even the 200 videos they filmed before one actually happened to go viral. Right? Everybody starts at 0 in terms of the following side, and the Instagram and TikToks have kind of built this up in terms of the comparison culture. Now, research from the American Psychological Association has consistently linked social media use to increase social comparison and decrease self-esteem, particularly in achievement-oriented individuals. And then a 2021 study in Computers and Human Behavior by Rosengnock and colleagues found that passive social media consumption, so scrolling without engaging, just think about it. You wake up or you roll over, you scroll a couple times, like that's the passive scrolling, was the strongest predictor of negative self-evaluation. And this is, as much as I hate saying this word, this is uniquely toxic in the fitness industry because our industry literally sells appearance and performance. That's what we strive on, is being able to get somebody to lose weight, feel better, perform better, jump higher, run faster, win games, win matches, drop times, right? That's every decreased pain even. Those are all very tangible things to every single person that almost every single person can relate with, right? Everybody, it's very hard to find somebody that doesn't want to feel better to improve their health or lose weight or jump higher or lift more or have bigger muscles, right? Or feel better about themselves when they go on vacation or have a wedding, right? These are things that every single person feels. And social media is going to make it feel much more amplified because we're constantly on these devices. And so your body, your clients' bodies, your facility, your brand, everything is visual and it's publicly evaluated very easily through these social media outlets. So you're not just comparing your knowledge to other trainers, which happens. You're comparing your physique and your facility, your client roster, how many people you have or how much you charge, and your social proof of this, right? This is a big thing in the fitness industry, and somebody that's obviously in the industry, and that's primarily what my content is about as well. I get a lot of that naturally served on my feed, and I'm sure you probably do too if you happen to be listening. And I think it's really amplified a lot of the issues, not just in the fitness industry, like it's amplified mental health issues across the board. Let's be clear. Okay. This is not just a fitness specific, but because our business and the way that we work is based a lot on appearance, it does seem to be amplified more than other areas in careers. All right, factor number 3 is the rapidly evolving science in our field. And the exercise science landscape is always shifting and improving. What was considered best practice 5 years ago, like say static stretching before sessions or what have you, or the idea that you need to eat every 2 to 3 hours to, basically improve your metabolism, right? These are all things that I heard when I was younger. They've been substantially revised based off of newer research, and we know that many of them are either not true or there's better ways to go about it. And this almost creates like a moving target in our industry. And for someone already prone to these imposter feelings, every new study that comes out seems to contradict something that we've been teaching, feels like evidence that they were a fraud all along. So instead of seeing evolving knowledge as like the normal process of science, we happen to internalize it as personal failure. Like, man, I screwed up and didn't do that. Like that's, again, going back to the like eating every 2 to 3 hours. It was definitely something, again, as when I was younger, was again very popular, and it many people just thought that was the truth. And we know that that's not what has to happen. Now, does that mean that I sucked at what I did? I clearly wasn't as good as I am now at my job, but that doesn't mean that I sucked, right? It's just things are changing, and as you evolve, as any science is going to, there's going to be things that update, and it just happens to shift itself within the personal training and fitness realm, especially because there's so many studies and how they're done, and the conclusions and the individuals that they happen to grab, right? There's so many things that can change. The context really matters on a lot of these, and people are going to find studies to truly support what they want to say at the end of the day. And that's something that I try to do when I not only do this podcast, but make content. And if I happen to do some kind of research on stuff, I'm not trying to cherry pick data. All right. That's what happens a lot in the fitness industry. I try to present the data as it is. You can do what you wish with that data. I just try to make sure that it is very easy to understand and what it's more than likely going to suggest. But again, that there are always exceptions to the rule in more cases, especially in our field. And that's why we always say in fitness industry, it basically depends, because it does. All right. Factor number 4 is going to be outcome attribution confusion. So here's one that doesn't really get talked about hardly at all, is that when a client succeeds, an imposter attributes that success to the client's effort, genetics, or their luck, not necessarily to their coaching and the services that they provided. But when a client doesn't get the results, the imposter immediately blames themselves at what could I have done better to help that client. Like, it's my fault they didn't lose weight. It's my fault they didn't hit a PR. They didn't add X amount of weight to their squat, bench, deadlift, right? And this is a textbook example of what psychologist Martin Seligman's research on attributional style describes, is that people with an internal stable global attribution for failure and an external unstable specific attribution for success are significantly more likely to experience anxiety, depression, and imposter-based feelings. And to put this very, very simply, is that you take all the blame and none of the credit. I'm going to guess that sounds very familiar to many of you listening, is that especially in the industry, if somebody doesn't get what they said they were going to, so they do a 12-week fat loss program, and maybe they lose a couple pounds, but they thought they were going to lose 10 pounds, right? They're going to try to blame us, or maybe we're going to blame ourselves that we could have done more. Or at the end of the day, the client was having cookies after dinner and was going out and having pizza and drinking more alcohol than they were actually supposed to, right? They're doing the things that are not modeling behaviors they should be. But at the end of the day, we still should take credit for, hey, we got you to eat healthier. We got you to lose weight. We got you to go after blood pressure medications. Like, what were the positives, right? So there is credit to be had, and it's okay to accept that credit. And it's also okay to take the blame if it is your blame. But if you did your best at trying to hold the client responsible, at the end of the day, it is the client's responsibility to actually put the food in their mouth or not put their food in their mouth. So a big issue within the fitness industry for sure is just, being willing to take the blame and not really being able to take the credit when you definitely probably do deserve the credit. Factor number 5 is going to be working in isolation. So most trainers and coaches that I know, especially independent ones and gym owners like myself, we work in a relative professional isolation, right? I don't have a boss that I report to. Neither does my wife. I mean, we work on things together, but we don't have somebody to report to. We are the end game. And if you happen to be an independent trainer or an online coach, it's the same way, right? You are the last final step. You are probably the only step. And so you may not have, and probably don't have, a department of like colleagues and other people validating your approach and what you're doing. So you don't sit in team meetings where you can see that everyone else is also trying to figure things out. Now, college coaches, high school coaches, the athletic realm is a little bit different because they usually do have a little bit of a team and a chain of command. And that's why I think they do a lot better in this field than those that typically work more on the isolation side. And so you have to think about it that, generally speaking, especially if you're doing one-on-one, you're alone with your client, or you're only with the clients that you're working. If you're doing small group stuff, you're programming everything and making the decisions on the training programs. And you also are going to be there with your self-doubt on all these things. And without a peer comparison group like readily available every single day, it's incredibly easy for us to assume that everyone else has it figured out and we're the exception, that we don't know what we're doing, right? You're in your own little echo chamber, and again, you're responsible for everything. So when any remote piece of doubt happens, you know that it's bouncing back to you, and you don't have that group of other trainers or coaches potentially around you all the time that you can be able to do that. Now, it could be different, but per training for sure, especially the one-on-one side, or if you happen to be in charge of everything or run a business like myself or doing online coaching, this is definitely going to be something that applies to you because you are responsible for every aspect of how that happens to work. All right, let's go on to the fourth segment here, and that's going to be the real cost, and that's going to be how does imposter syndrome damage our career? And I want to talk about this because imposter syndrome isn't just an uncomfortable feeling. Like, you will feel it, but it has measurable, documented impacts on career trajectory, your income that you can make, and your overall professional development. And so let's talk about what some of these can be in terms of how they're going to affect your career outside of just what you're manifesting inside. Now, the undercharging and undervaluing services is a huge one in our industry, a huge one. And I will tell you firsthand, especially with my business side, we definitely undercharged, right? We have definitely undervalued our services. I still, to this day, think that we do not charge enough and we undervalue our services. But you can only do so much within the economic area and socioeconomic aspects that you have access to, right? I can't charge, for me, I'm, an hour and 10-ish, hour and 15-ish away from Indianapolis. I can't charge Indianapolis rates, right? I'm in Terre Haute, Indiana. I can't charge Chicago rates. However, I do know that the programming that we provide, the experience that we provide, the level of education that we have, right? The quality of equipment that we have, like, there's certain things that we meet those standards. We can do better, and probably do better than some of those places in terms of what we're actually doing from a service perspective, but I still can't charge those rates, even though that's would be considered a inferior product, right? I'm not saying that we are the best, but there's definitely people out there that do stuff worse than us. There has to be, right? And I like to think that we hover more towards doing things better. And at the end of the day, this is probably the most financially devastating consequence. So when you don't believe that you're worth what you're charging, you either keep your rates artificially low or you over deliver to the point of burnout trying to justify your price. And I've definitely been here. I'm here way more than I probably should have been. And so there's been some research from the Journal of Vocational Behavior in 2015, and it found that imposter syndrome was significantly negatively correlated with salary negotiation behavior and promotion seeking. So people who feel like imposters don't ask for raises. They don't raise their rates. They don't pitch premium services. And over a career, over a career, that adds up. That's going to compound into a massive loss of income. And I've talked to other trainers and coaches who've been in the industry for 10 plus years. They produce incredible client results and content and education, and they're still charging rates that are lower than brand new trainers at commercial gyms. And it's not because the market won't support the higher rates. It's because they generally don't believe that they deserve those rates. And again, going back to when my business started, that is 100% us. That was 100% us. What we charged was so ungodly low. I don't even know how our business got up and going. Maybe just because it got numbers going. It's one of those things where you do charge less. Theoretically, you can get more people. And it can help in the beginning side to some degree. But knowing the education experience that I had, I should not have done that, right? I was going to be one of the most qualified people in the area without a doubt, so I should have charged for it as such. But overall, again, in the fitness industry, this is very, very common. All right, we also have avoiding growth opportunities as being a potential cost. So imposter syndrome makes you self-select out of opportunities. So you don't apply for that strength coach position because you assume they want someone better than you, or you don't submit a presentation proposal for a conference that maybe you're interested in trying to land or be at. Because who would want to hear from Brandon Smitley, right? They want to hear from Eric Cressy, right? They want to hear from Mike Boyle. They want to hear from Dave Tate, right? They want to hear from these big names. So why would they want to hear from me? And or maybe even you don't launch the online coaching program or the online education thing that you're thinking about doing because you're afraid of it being publicly scrutinized. And in 2018, there was a study in Frontiers in Psychology by Cockley and colleagues, and they found that imposter syndrome was a stronger predictor of career goal avoidance than actual measured competence. So to make that a little bit clearer, it's not your skills that are holding you back. It's your perception of your skills. You very well might be qualified enough, and you probably are qualified enough to speak on certain things. But it's your perception of those that are holding you back from reaching out and potentially doing that. And I think it's, really big. And to give you an example here, this was kind of back to COVID, but we were going to try to host our first sports performance seminar. We were going to host it through, got it approved through NSCA CEUs. And I was reaching out to other strength coaches and performance people to come and speak. I let them truly speak on whatever they wanted to speak upon, so long as they were passionate about it. To me, that's more important when you get a speaker. You want somebody speaking about something passionate, not because of who their name and what they are. But you don't want to try to, especially early on. But anyways, I happened to land Coach Ballou. At the time, he was at IU, and he was the head strength coach there for their football program. And I kind of shot my shot and said, hey, I would love to have you drive down to Terre Haute, Indiana, and be our keynote speaker. Like, I want you to be the guy. I also had Mike Robertson was on board to do this. Will Fleming was on board to do this. Julia and Christian Antu were on board to do this. Even Lee Taft was on board to do this. Okay. If you're listening to this podcast and you know all those names, you know that is a hell of a lineup to have in Terre Haute, Indiana, speaking on athletic performance. Like, for me, I would drive hours to go to that. Okay. And COVID clearly took it away from me. And even make it even better, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Lee Taft on this, that Lee said that he would do it for free. I was offering to try to get these people paid, and I asked them what their rates were, and if I could make it happen and get enough people signed up, that I 100% would want to pay them. But, like if we say only had 10 people sign up and I was going to be out $4,000, I'm going to be out $3,000. I may have to figure out a way to, make that happen. And it's a risk being taken. I'm kind of going off topic here, but you get the idea that somebody of Lee Taft's caliber willing to do something like that for free, one, says a lot about him as a person, but also says how valuable and important he believes what he talks about is. That he's willing to give his education away for free in terms of his time. And he knows that obviously there's money coming in. He's got to pay to attend. But, I was very scared to contact these individuals. I'm going to be honest. I did not think that I was educated enough. I was on the same playing field as these people, that I had enough, we'll just call it enough pull to get them to do these things. And Coach Ballou, unfortunately, also took the job at Alabama, and he's still there. But if you think about it, those are things that, to me, is a good example of avoiding growth opportunities, right? I'm obviously going to have time to individually sit down with them and talk with them that other people are not going to get to, right? They're coming to effectively my sports performance clinic. So I'm going to be able to be a beneficiary of that. And, that was a growth opportunity that I took. It just didn't happen to unfortunately fall through, but I'm still in touch with all of those single people today, right? I can reach out to those individuals and have a conversation. So it did actually transpire to something. But most people, to get back to what I was talking about, most people are not going to shoot their shot because they don't think that they're there. And the worst thing that happens is you get ghosted, or you get told no, or maybe they say, hey, is there something else that we can figure out to work on? Like, you might have to modify some things, but I think you should shoot your shot if you do have the skills to shoot the shot. But the fitness industry definitely does not like to do that because they don't think they're good enough. All right, another cost is going to be burnout and overcompensation. And this is for sure 100% an issue in the fitness industry, is that the superhuman type that we talked about earlier as this particular subset group, they are particularly prone to this aspect. And so you work excessive hours, you maybe take on too many clients, you say yes to absolutely everything, and you pour a disproportionate amount of energy into preparation in terms of your sessions, your programming, all to compensate for this perceived inadequacy that's not even actually there. Okay. Very, very common in the fitness industry. And a 2020 study in the Journal of Personality Assessment by Hutchins and colleagues found that significant positive correlation between imposter syndrome severity and burnout scores meditated by overwork based behaviors. And you're not burning out because the work is too hard, that we're burning out because we're working 3 times harder than we actually need to in order to feel quote unquote safe. And this, I will say that this is something that I relate to very, very hard. I talked about it earlier, is that, I always feel like there's something I can be doing. This podcast is a great example. I definitely do not have to have a podcast. So those of you that listen to it, I really do appreciate it. But, I feel that I should try to educate others and speak on my personal experiences. And if I can help even one person, that's the ultimate goal with every single episode, is that if I can help one person or educate one person on something to elevate their life elsewhere, that the podcast to me was worth it. I obviously see other benefits as well, that I get to be able to create short content out of it and use it for Instagram. Like, there's definitely other things that really help for sure. I'm not going to deny that. But again, I always feel like there's something else I can be doing. And I do have my hands in a lot of different things because, again, I am not only trying to ensure that my brand has good recognition, I'm also trying to continue to educate myself, but I also like to continually educate others and hopefully help others because I feel that I have enough experience and background to be able to do that. But again, going back to this, the burnout portion of it is real. There are times that I have to step back and realize that I'm overstepping my bounds. I'm doing a little too much, too fast, too soon. And that happens a lot in the industry. All right. The last thing this could be costing you could be knowledge hoarding instead of actually having knowledge application. And this one is, I think I'll describe it as sneaky. It's when you feel like an imposter, you tend to prioritize information gathering over information application. So you might spend thousands of dollars on these certifications and courses, for example, but you never really implement what you learn because you're waiting until you feel ready to do so. And I'll speak about my wife on this. She's getting her prenatal and postnatal certification from Girls Gone Strong. And in my opinion, I don't think she needs that. I think she can do enough self-education and continue to level up her game in that realm. I think she knows a good fair amount. She definitely does. She knows what she's doing. But we're trying to be a resource for the midwives in our community. And we had a midwife. I'm not going to go into our birthing story on this podcast episode, but we had every intention of having our kid at home. And we tried to have our kid at home. It just didn't go to plan. That's part of life. But she said, I want to be able to help other mothers be able to improve their health, fitness, wellness, either pre-pregnancy or during their pregnancy and or post-pregnancy. And the midwives were like, well, we need somebody that we can prove is qualified to be able to do this. Not that we don't trust you, but having that pre and postnatal certification is kind of, again, going back to being able to prove that you have the knowledge and the basic foundation to be able to do this. And it's going to make them sleep better at night at the end of the day. And so we decided that, hey, this is something that we're going to do. But again, going back to the knowledge application side, is I told her that, we've got to make sure that once you complete this, you're on them, that you are readily available. You can take clients. You can do this. But also step 2 is that we now need to be able to create a training program specifically for this that is available if someone can't afford our services, just like our regular personal training program, for example, but they are wanting to do something for their health and wellness and be able to take care of their bodies from a pre and postnatal side, that we can have a prenatal and a postnatal program that is available for purchase that's either delivered through a True Coach or Train Heroic, delivered through online, and still is going to have our information and our knowledge readily available. And we obviously hope that they choose to do that in our training facility, and that's the brand that they have access to. But if not, they can do it from home or, Planet Fitness, what have you. So this is something that I'm kind of sneaking up on here, is that I'm trying to incentivize her to make sure that we apply this education into something that can eventually come back and help us on the return side, but also then long term help us acquire more clientele as well. And the research here on this says that you're never going to feel ready no matter any of these things that you get. You're never going to feel 100% confidence you're ready to dive in. And Clance's own follow-up research on this found that imposter feelings do not decrease with increased credentials, that more certifications, in this case, don't fix the imposter syndrome. If anything, they can even reinforce it, because each new learning experience that we happen to gather from these certifications or courses or whatever we're doing from the continuing education side reminds us how much we don't know. And for some of us, we do a really good job of handling that, and we know how much we don't know. And it's a very humble thing to be able to step back and say, I don't know that. But also at the same time, again, it can backfire to some degree. Is like, I learned something. And I think about this in PRI all the time. I learned something, but now I'm like down this rabbit hole, but I really don't know stuff, right? There's a whole lot more that I can go onto this. And that's how I felt whenever I got into the PRI side of things. All right. Those are the costs. And now let's talk about this next aspect, which is going to be more of like the framework, strategies that we can use to overcome this imposter syndrome. And so now that we've got the problem defined, we've kind of talked about why the fitness industry breeds this more than other careers and industries. And we understand that what it can cost us. I think it's important that we figure out how to go about it and what we should actually do about it. And there's this thing that is a short acronym for this, and it's called R.E.A.L.S, R-E.A.L.S, a R.E.A.L.S framework. And so the first one is going to be the R, and that's going to be to reframe the narrative. Okay, this is not something that I invented. Okay, I want to make sure I'm very clear about that. Not invent this. Doing my research, this is the approach that is recommended to be able to address imposter syndrome. And so for letter R is going to be to reframe the narrative. So first and most important step is going to be the cognitive side of just reframing things. And this comes directly from cognitive behavioral therapy research, which has decades of evidence supporting its effectiveness for just imposter syndrome specifically. And a 2011 meta-analysis by Hoffman and colleagues in cognitive therapy and research demonstrated that CBT-based interventions produced large effect sizes. So the Cohen's number was a 0.68 to 1.2 for anxiety and self-defeating thought patterns consistent with imposter syndrome. And so what would this look like in practice? That when you catch yourself thinking, I don't know enough to train this population, for example, we have to reframe that as, I know more than my client needs me to know right now in this moment. And I'm also continuing to learn to level up my game just in case. Or if I want to progress this more, or I want to have a more in-depth conversation with somebody else that is a professional in this aspect. Or if you happen to think that individual trainer or coach is so much better than me, that we reframe that as that trainer has a different experience and subset of experiences, and comparison isn't a measure of my competence. It's just a measure of their experience and how they got there versus my experience and how I got to where I'm at. Nobody gets into this field the exact same way. And so it's not right to think that way. So we just want to make sure that we're not comparing our education and what we know. We're just saying this person has a different experience and I have an experience. There's obviously going to be a lot of overlap of what we know, but therefore, because of those experiences, they're going to know a couple things here and there, or that's their subset. They're going to know more about that stuff than I am, where my expertise and focus is in this one. So a good one going back to the conditioning and the mobility, right? There's a lot of things that we definitely understand that are similar and probably agree upon if we had a conversation, what we know, but there's going to be areas that do not overlap, like the Venn diagram. And this isn't positive affirmations. It's just evidence-based cognitive restructuring. Right? It's deliberately replacing distorted thinking patterns with accurate ones. The goal is to make sure that we're not being delusional in our own heads when we're actually thinking about these things. All right, that E of that R.E.A.L is then we're going to externalize the evidence. And so imposter syndrome does live in your head. Okay, it is up here in your head. You are better than what you think you are. Every single person probably listening to podcasts is. The antidote is getting the evidence out of your head and into a tangible format. And so you basically want to start almost like a individual evidence file, I guess is probably the best way to name this as I'm trying to think about it, is that it's sometimes called like a brag file. This is what the research calls it. Or you can even call it like having an inventory of like accomplishments that you've done. But the evidence file is something that works pretty well because it is what it is. It's evidence. It's objective evidence that contradicts that imposter narrative that you have going on upstairs. And so client testimonials work great for this, before and after results, certifications that you've earned, positive feedback from mentors or people that you've interned under letters of recommendation, problems that you've solved, like helping somebody move better, improving the range of motion, like their hip internal rotation or their hip external rotation, clients who've referred others to you, right? Document these things. Make sure you're aware of these things, that they're actually happening, because when that imposter syndrome starts kicking in and you start thinking it, you don't really argue, I guess, with yourself with feelings. You're going to use those things. Hey, I have these testimonials, people saying things about me, and these before and after results, and these are the things that I've done with these individuals. That's actual evidence of that you are good enough and you are competent enough and you do know what you're doing. And more research from that Clancy's imposter phenomenon scale validation studies has shown that when you structure self-reflection on concrete achievements, that it significantly reduces your imposter phenomenon scores over time. So when they did these scores, that when you have things that you can fall back on and are either readily available or that you see more frequently, or that you realize that that imposter syndrome and phenomenon that you're getting is going to be less likely to occur. Like you might have it for a split second, but then you have a reminder, oh yeah, this person referred me this week. I am good enough at what I do. Okay. The A is going to be of this R.E.A.L. is going to be accept the discomfort. So we can accept that it's going to happen. And so, I'm not going to push back on the feel-good narrative. Overcoming imposter syndrome does not mean eliminating the feeling. Like that'd be great, but research suggests that the goal is changing your relationship with the feeling. Okay. Again, everybody is going to have this. I'm a firm believer in that everybody is insecure about something about themselves. And also when you become good at something, you are going to have natural imposter syndrome. The goal is being able to change the feelings and the relationship that we have with that. And so this acceptance and commitment therapy, also called the ACT, which has a strong empirical support from a 2020 meta-analysis by Glosser and colleagues in the Journal of Contextual Behavior Science, teaches psychological flexibility, which is the ability to experience comfortable thoughts and emotions without letting them dictate your behavior. To put this in very practical terms that we can all understand, is that you can feel like a fraud and still raise your rates. Okay. You can feel underqualified and still apply for a position. Okay. You can feel nervous and launch that training program that you're wanting to. The feelings are going to show up. I don't want to say that you can't control them, because they're going to happen, right? Think about, if you haven't listened to me and you're in the sports thing, into sports like I am, just think back at a competitive time where you had a ass load of pressure on you to do something, right? You get the nervousness, you get the jitters, right? You get that like empty feeling in your stomach. You can't control that. That's pressure. That's what's going to happen in the situation. And it happens to everybody. But what changes is not necessarily the feeling, but how we react and accept that discomfort and then use that to go on. Again, in these cases, like it's okay to feel like you're not good enough, but still raise your rates. That's okay, right? It's okay to have that feeling. Again, as long as you have the skill set to be able to justify doing it, and the research justify doing it, right? I'm not just telling you to go raise your rates, but I'm just saying that the feelings that you're having along with what you're trying to do are very normal. And I once had a wrestling coach tell me that feeling nervous or pressure in individual moments, in this case was big matches, but if you feel nervous in that pressure, it just means that you care. it's something that's valuable to you, and that's a good thing. And that's something that I've taken. I mean, that was a long time ago. That was probably 20 years ago that I got that quote from that coach, and it stuck with me. And it's something that I've always tried to rely on personally. And I think you can do the same thing by just accepting the discomfort. It's going to happen, so accept it. So think of this almost like training your brain. I've kind of talked about some of this in previous episodes. And just like you wouldn't expect your client to never feel discomfort walking into the gym for the first time, or there being a lot of people in there, or feeling kind of awkward doing a movement, right? They're going to feel something there. And that's going to make it somewhat challenging. But we still expect them to be able to perform and still give their best. And as a trainer or working in the fitness industry, you should expect yourself to never feel discomfort during professional growth. That's very natural, and I think it's a great thing to feel. We just have to accept that and reframe how we use that to push ourselves further. All right, the letter L in this reel is leverage your community. So remember the isolation factor thing that I kind of talked about, how we're in our field, we work by ourselves a lot, or we're doing things individually, right? We're not having a chain of command. The research-backed solution here is intentional professional community. Find other people that you trust, that you can get around, you can have conversations with, that, maybe that's a school community or an Instagram group or a Facebook group or people at the gym, that you can get those feelings out and be able to have discussions. And so a 2019 study in the Journal of Counseling Psychology, again, I'm probably going to screw this name up, by Chakravarti, found that peer mentorship and professional support networks were among the strongest predictive factors against imposter syndrome. So when you're in a room or a group chat, or you go to a mastermind or a conference with other fitness professionals who openly discuss their struggles and their uncertainties and are trying to learn from one another, it normalizes the experience. It makes you feel more human. Again, this podcast episode is designed to be able to do that effectively. Obviously, I'm doing the talking and you're just having to listen. But at the end of the day, it's still trying to make sure that we can understand that these are normal occurrences, especially in our industry, and it's okay, and that we can have ways to address them and continue to get better at them. And it's one of the reasons that I really believe so strongly in the continuing education environments that are not just lecture-based, especially when you think about like Swiss Symposium, or you go to some of these state clinics or the national clinics, and there's areas for people to just hang out. Like they intentionally build out 15, 20, 30 minutes of time that you can go talk to other people. And it's very hard. But going up to other people and just introducing yourself and just having a very brief conversation and asking a question is great. But those rooms that allow for conversation are definitely the better ones than going, just sitting and taking notes and going home. Get up, talk to people, be more interactive. Actively search out those continuing education environments, because they are awesome. One of the things that are just better overall, they're more fun, they're more enjoyable, but it's going to be better for this imposter syndrome feeling if you happen to feel like you get this a lot. And those conversations that we have with other trainers and coaches and personal trainers, or professionals, during the breaks of the seminar, those group discussions, those are vulnerable moments where someone can admit that they don't have everything figured out, and that's therapeutic. Right? You're talking to somebody that probably is a professional on something or an expert on something. You're explaining that you don't understand something, and you're getting the information. And that person acknowledges, hey, this is okay. This is why I'm here. Right? It feels good inside to be able to get your questions answered, and then also be around other people that are clearly there to learn, and they clearly don't have it figured out either. We all don't have it figured out, but it's very obvious that they don't have it figured out. So for this, find your people, find your group, find your community, find the seminars that you like to go get a mentor. I have people that I reach out to all the time regarding questions and stuff, and critically be willing to find the ones that go first and being honest about your struggles. And you'll be shocked about how many other people are actually feeling this way when you have those conversations, or they can relate, say, hey, I was in your shoes. I understand what that feels like. All right. The S for the reels, the last one, set competent benchmarks. Not perfect standards that you have to hit. And so the final piece of this is going to be that imposters tend to measure themselves against an impossible standard. and they complete the mastery of everything, right? The fix is replacing that standard with specific, achievable competence benchmarks. Find things that you can hit along the way, not shoot for the moon. So instead of thinking that, hey, I need to know everything about shoulder rehab or prehab, like R.E.A.L.S, for example, your benchmark now becomes, I can identify the 3 most common shoulder pathologies in the population that I'm working with. In R.E.A.L.'s example, this would be baseball. But it could be you're working with older individuals, so you're probably seeing other things. And I think that's going to make things a little bit more achievable. You're going to be able to feel a lot better when you know you need to refer out, and I can program around these issues more safely and effectively, letting me do my job a lot better. That's something that's more concrete, it's more achievable, and it's professionally fine, right? You have 3 things that you can kind of hyper focus on. R.E.A.L.S, on the other hand, probably has forgotten more about the shoulder than I know about the shoulder, right? So obviously, if I had a baseball question or a baseball issue and I couldn't address it, right, I'm going to recommend that client to R.E.A.L.S or somebody else, or find a way to get in touch with R.E.A.L and maybe ask a question. And this approach is very common in just general goal setting, right? If you think about the goal settings that you get in sports and school, if you've ever taken a sports psych class, very common to have this aspect built in. And there's been decades of work showing that specific, moderately challenging goals produce significantly better performance and self-efficacy than vague aspirational ones. So again, if you think about those SMART things that you learn when you take your personal training certification, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely, I can even rattle those off still. Like, those are how you want to set your goals, and improving upon this is no different when it comes to the imposter syndrome and having competence on other things. So what you can do here is you can write down just a couple competence benchmarks for your current role or job or population that you work with. Again, not perfectionist-based targets, just regular competence benchmarks that you'd like to achieve and that you understand, or that you already do understand. And then when you meet them, you would just acknowledge that, hey, I got this done. I definitely know this stuff. Going back to my wife's certification, right? There's certain things that she's going to know a lot better after completing that certification than she did prior. And then when you exceed them, you just update. You find a way to dig a little bit deeper, try to really understand that. And you just keep chipping away over time. And it's going to give the imposter syndrome thoughts that you're having, it's going to give you something that you're more concrete and to evaluate yourself on, rather than, that standard of, I need to know enough. I don't know enough. And you will. Okay. Let's wrap this up with a bigger bow here. Let's kind of put this into practice. So, I don't want you to have listened to this episode and you just nodded along the whole time and then you can forget about it by the next 24, 48 hours. I think this is going to be an action plan that will work well for you. 5 things that you can do. And if you're really serious about your imposter syndrome and fixing it, these are going to be some non-negotiable things to take you serious about it. But I hopefully can give you rolling in the right step, in the right direction. Everybody's different. But these are 5 things based upon the research and me doing some reading, things that have helped me personally, I think that might be able to help you. And the first thing I want to recommend that you do is that you start that evidence file, right? Go onto your phone, open a note, Word document, whatever it is. Write it down as personal evidence or imposter syndrome evidence, whatever you want to title it. And write down 3 professional wins that you've had the past month. They don't have to be huge, but one of your clients hitting a goal, hitting a PR, winning a meet, going 9 for 9, losing 10 pounds, right? All those are things acceptable. Maybe even if you don't have any, you take your clients and you ask for some reviews, either on Google or that you can use on your social media account. Go look at some of the positive reviews that you've had from previous times, copy and paste those in there. Or even like a hard problem that you happen to solve regarding like an assessment or an injury with an athlete or a client, or working around an issue with a parent, which I had this week. Like those are wins. And those are huge wins. So write those down. as a thing that you can refer, and get in a habit of maybe updating that list, especially when you get a big one, right? If you've got some good stuff, maybe you don't put every little thing in there, right? But if you have a major win, something you're really proud of, I think it's great that you just put that in there. All right, the second action step here I'd like to do is once you've done that, then you're going to try to figure out what kind of imposter type goes back to you. Or, we talked about the 5 types that I described. Try to figure out which one you are, and knowing your pattern, I think, is going to give you a great first step into interrupting it and figuring out how to go after it. You're probably going to find that several can apply, especially if you bring in certain circumstances, for sure, but you're probably going to drift more towards one than the other. Try to identify that to the best of your ability, and also put that in that note section. That way you can remember what type of that you are. If you would not remember, you don't have to, but could be helpful. The third step is then going to be have one honest conversation. So this week, reach out to a colleague, a mentor, somebody you really trust, and let them know that you are having these imposter-based syndromes, or say, hey, I'm feeling this sort of way. Have you ever felt like this? What do you recommend? Have those conversations either out loud, over the phone, text messaging's fine, maybe FaceTime, something like that. But I think the person-to-person interaction, if you're in the fitness industry, you understand this, is a lot more meaningful. But find somebody to be able to talk to about it. At least get experiences from somebody. I'm obviously giving you my experiences here over this podcast, but you can find somebody else as well to be able to talk to about that. I think you should. And also have somebody that know that you can reach out to is another good first step there. All right, the fourth step is going to be to write 5 competence benchmarks for your current role, position, job, whatever you do in the fitness industry. 5 things that you want to be able to obtain. These are not aspirational based goals. I want benchmarks that you think that would make you feel good enough in your particular aspect, and actually looks like in your position right now. So for example, if I were to try to figure out a couple of competence benchmarks for myself and goals for myself, right, it's going to be 1, do a better job on my accounting side. Be more on top of that. Don't keep putting that off and put other things in front of it. Give myself a set date to get each month done, right? Don't keep pushing it off. Or something that I've really been wanting to do as well is I don't feel like I'm doing a good enough job asking for referrals. So every week I should ask somebody, hey, is there somebody that trains like you, or you're friends with, or that you know is looking to improve their health, fitness, wellness? Would you mind referring us if you happen to bring it up in conversation, right? That's a very hard conversation to have, and I'm not good at having them. But that would be a great benchmark for me to do, because I know that I'm good enough, and I know that I can have a conversation. I know that I'm competent and professional enough to have that conversation, especially with a personal training client. Kids have to word things a little bit different. Usually got to talk to parents, but maybe it's call parent. Maybe that is a benchmark for me, is to call parent, because I am good enough and know that my skill sets are good enough to be able to reach out and ask for a referral. All right, the last step is go through your social media account and look at what you've posted in the past couple weeks, and see, is that content providing the information you want it to provide? Are you confident in that information that you're providing, and how does it look? And then also, not only just looking at your profile or whatever you're using from a social media site. If you don't use social media, you don't have to worry about this, obviously. But also go back and look at your own data on your social media. Look at how many hours you spent on your phone on that app, and do an audit there, and that you've been passively consuming content versus actively creating and learning from it. Now, I'll be honest, I think social media is a great way to get invited into learning, but I don't think it is the way to learn. So for example, what I mean is I take this podcast and I create shorts and clips from it. Okay. I have a software that I use that I pay for every, I think it's billed me yearly, but we'll just say monthly, whatever. And I use it and AI to find things to be able to pull out pieces that are great, that highlight pieces of this podcast. Now, I don't expect somebody to take that short 20, 30, 40-second clip and to be able to take a whole lot of information away from that clip and immediately apply it. If they can, awesome. But that's not my intended goal. The intended goal is to get them to come listen to this podcast, which is over an hour long, which is educational, which will then be able to create learning that they can learn something from and then go apply it, right? Context is always huge. And with the short attention spans that we have in social media, you almost got to hook somebody in and say, I want to learn more, and then provide the actual long form content. I do the same thing with my YouTube material as well, right? That's why I make YouTube videos, because I want to provide a learning aspect that is longer that I can't do on Instagram, TikTok, what have you. So going back to that, go look at those stats you have on your social media. And if you are spending way too much time, trim that down, trim the fat, and get away from that, because it will help your imposter syndrome immediately. I assure you, if you use your social media less or don't do the passive scrolling, excuse me, you're getting on there to post your stuff, interact with the people that interact with your stuff, then you move on. And I've tried really hard to do this. The one grace period that I give me, I'll tell you what I do, is I set a 2-hour limit on my phone per day. And that's anytime the app gets opened. Okay. It's not like, posting and whatever doesn't count. I obviously got to get on there to sometimes create the content or film it or type it out. Right. That all is going to be on there. And then I get on there to interact with people. But I have a 2-hour, and I have not hit that 2-hour mark in a long time, except for on Fridays. Friday is the one day that I give myself, because I usually come home early with my son. He naps, he does things. I have some time there where I let myself kind of doom scroll. And so every now and then I will hit that 2-hour time limit. And there's the one day that I give myself a pass. But any other day, if I hit that 2-hour time limit, I'm done with the app. I've spent too much time on the app, either scrolling or interacting with people or whatever. And the thing is, you got to remember, I run a business account and my personal account, and that it does not matter. It's not for the individual account. I have it set for the app. So anytime I open that app, that timer starts going. And I want to try to get it down to an hour. I've not pulled that trigger, but you get the idea, right? I'm not going to elaborate on this anymore. I've kind of went too long on it as an action step, but you get the idea. Audit how much you're on social media, pull it down from where you're at, no matter how much you're on. And when you are posting stuff, look at the stuff that you're posting and actually try to be more confident in what you're saying, because you do have that experience. And post that thing that you've been dreading posting. We all have that one thing that we've been wanting to post about or make or whatever. Go do it. You are able to do it. You are smart enough to do it. You're educated enough to do it. Go do it. And if it flops, who cares? And if it succeeds, awesome. Happy for you. All right. So let's close this up. Write this all down. I want to kind of leave you with this to kind of wrap this podcast episode up. And first of all, the fact is that if you're listening to this podcast episode, you're investing your time in your professional development, and you're trying to get better at what you do in the fitness industry. And to me, that is evidence against the imposter narrative right off the get-go. Actual fraudulent people in our industry do not worry about being frauds. They don't listen to, maybe they listen to podcasts, but they're not listening to podcasts to actually accelerate their fitness and performance education. Generally speaking, they're listening to it from entertainment, like Joe Rogan. Sure, there might be some educational stuff there, but I do think there's some stuff that's also questionable. I'm not going to go down that, but you're listening to something that's more truly driven towards your fitness field. Let's just put it that way. All right. Actual frauds, they're not going to seek out any kind of research. They're not going to question their competency, because they're not invested in being competent. But you are. And I think that does matter. And that's incredibly important. Imposter syndrome, it's not like a life sentence. It's just a pattern. And patterns can be interrupted. They can be redirected. They can be remanaged. And with the right tools and the right support system, the right mentors, it's much easier to do that. And I think it's going to come to your attention that no, you're not going to get it to disappear entirely. It's not going to happen. No way. I still suffer from this myself, right? That's the realness part of it. And if you can't get rid of it, I think it's awesome. But let's be honest, the fitness industry, because of the background I'm given, it lends itself to having it more applicable than not. And therefore, I am somebody that deals with it. But it does not have to run and or ruin your fitness career or your personal training job or your strength conditioning job. So if this podcast episode happened to resonate with you, do me a favor, share it with one fitness professional that you think might be able to benefit from it or needs to hear it. You can also share it over on your social medias. If you're listening over on like Apple or Spotify, it's super easy. You just hit that little share button down there, share it to your stories. If you want, give me a tag. I really appreciate it. But if not, even a share is awesome. You can also do the same thing on Twitter and X and Facebook. You name it. Those are all great. Or you can even copy the link and send it to a friend in a text message, and they can just open it up on their phone whenever they would like to. You can also screenshot it if you really want to, but I think that's the best way to do it. I think it's something that we do need to normalize as a conversation in the fitness industry because it is overall pretty silenced. I think there's a lot more people that suffer from it, and they just kind of like, I don't want to be open about this, and they definitely should. And I think it's actually doing more damage to the people that do have some really great things to share. You just need to be open enough to know, hey, I'm able to share this. You should be confident in what you're doing. You're doing good stuff. And I try to remind friends and colleagues when I see stuff on their social media or on their stories, I try to comment back, like, love what you're doing. Keep up the good work. Love to see it. Send them some handshake emojis, right? Like, let them know that they're doing good stuff, because a lot of times people don't hear it enough. And I think when people are doing good work, they should know about it, because unfortunately what happens, somebody sees one thing they don't like and then they lay into them how bad it sucks, more than showing them appreciation for the things that they are doing that's really great. Now, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the Thirst More Podcast over on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. And also hit that like button, leave a comment if you happen to watch it over on the YouTube. I really appreciate that. You can also leave a review on how you're listening to this on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, iTunes, whatever. Leave me a 5-star rating if you happen to really enjoy the episode or just enjoy the podcast, and a comment. I also appreciate that as well. It definitely helps me more than you know. Again, this is not a major big podcast, so any and all love is really greatly appreciated. And as always, you can check the show notes for all the research that I happen to mention. I've always put that stuff down there in case if you want to dig a little bit deeper for your own individual research and or wanting to know where I kind of got stuff, or you're wanting to dive deeper. I think that's awesome. I try to always put that in the show notes as well for the podcast side. And I will also have that in the description box as well of the YouTube channel. And I've got some other extra information that I usually put in there, kind of a synopsis. If you happen to want to jump around the podcast, totally get it. These ones that get over an hour, sometimes you might just want to cherry pick some stuff, and that's entirely okay. As always, I appreciate you tuning in for the episode. If you happen to make it to the very end, again, that's awesome. It means a lot to me. And if you happen to share with another friend or individual, that's also great. And I really appreciate that as well. And, at the end of the day, you are good enough. You do know your stuff. So share it. Send it to other people. Let me know about it. I think you're doing good stuff. If you happen to be listening to this podcast episode, that to me says enough right there. Again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you at the next episode.